Actually, just yesterday, I finished the memoir by Alexei Navalny. It was published a couple of months ago. It was published posthumously. Do you remember this guy, Alexei Navalny? He died this year. It was February 16th. His death was announced from a Russian prison. He had been a opposition leader, opposing Vladimir Putin, opposing the Putin regime, going back years. I think he first started getting involved in politics maybe back in like 2001 or so. He was 47 when he died. He left behind a wife. Her name is Yulia, and 2 children. He has a daughter named Dasha, who is 23 years old or so, and then a son. His name is Zakhar, I think, and he is a teenager, 16, 17. He had been in prison in Russia for 3 years. He was imprisoned in 2021, and 3 years later, the Russian authorities announced his death. Now, before that, before being in prison, he had already been poisoned. You might remember this. This was back in 2020. This was August of 2020. It was a big story, international story, that this Russian opposition leader, he was the most famous Russian opposition leader at the time of his poisoning, at the time of his death, Alexei Navalny. He was poisoned. He recovered in Germany. He went to Germany, at a hospital in Germany, and there he recovered from it almost killed him. Likely that was the intent of the poisoning, to kill him. Obviously it was Vladimir Putin was behind it, but he never admitted it, of course. It's his MO, it's the kind of thing he does. Alexei Navalny recovered with his family in Germany. He was in a German hospital in the second half of the year 2020. At one point, he narrates this in his memoir. He says that the German, I guess it's the chancellor, I think they called her at the time, Angela Merkel. Of course, she's no longer, Olaf Scholz is the German chancellor now, but at the time she was the German chancellor, Angela Merkel. She came and visited him at the hospital, and she said, "What are your plans?" And he said, "What are my plans? My plans are to go back to Russia." And she said, "There's no hurry to do that. You might want to rethink that." He went back to Russia. He had to recover, of course, and he had to get his strength back, and so it was later than he wanted to go back earlier. The doctors finally released him from the hospital, and he went back to Russia in January of 2021. He did not set foot on Russian soil before he was apprehended by the authorities in the airport and imprisoned from that point and never left. Well, he left several prisons. They kept transferring him to different prisons, to worse and worse conditions. I read his memoir because I was interested. What makes a man do that? What makes a man live his life in opposition to the powers that be? And not only that, but so put yourself in danger to go back to Russia. Was that, is that a smart thing to do? Was that folly? Was that a good thing? Was it courage or was it foolishness to go back to Russia? And of course, a lot of people asked him before he was going back, why are you going back? And after he went back, why did you come back? And he asked himself that question, did I do the right thing? Was that the best thing to do, to go back to Russia? And so his memoir, to a large extent, tries to address that question. Why did I do this? What was I going for? Obviously, he knew that the very real possibility is that he would be arrested as soon as he set foot in the airport and that he would die in prison, which is exactly what happened. Was it meaningful to do that? Well, he addresses the question several times in his memoir. Here is one time. In fact, this is the very end of the memoir. This is probably the last thing he wrote. This was an Instagram post. I'll be honest, I'm not exactly sure how he posted to Instagram from a Russian prison. I don't really understand I don't know how you post to Instagram from an American city of Florence. I've never done such a thing as post to Instagram, but he was able to post to Instagram. And so this was an Instagram post from January 17th, the year 2024. Within a month of that post, he would be dead. And he is trying, in this Instagram post, now I didn't read it on Instagram, and I think it was posted in Russian anyway, but it's included in this memoir in English. Why did you come back? He's addressing this question. Why did you come back? And he says, in part, it's a long post, I have my country and my convictions. I don't want to give up my country or betray it. If your convictions mean something, you must be prepared to stand up for them and make sacrifices if necessary. And if you're not prepared to do that, you have no convictions. You just think you do. But those are not convictions and principles. They're only thoughts in your head. So he came back. You know, his story reminds me of somebody else who made almost exactly the same decision. And I know that his story probably reminds you of several of you of this story that I'm thinking of, because I know some of you went to see a movie about this guy. I think the movie maybe is still in theaters even right now. This is a guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And I've talked about this decision he made before, that this was 1939. In June of 1939, Bonhoeffer was in New York City. And the reason he was in New York City was specifically to be safe, because it wasn't safe in his home country of Germany, because there was this guy named Adolf Hitler who was in power, and it was obvious that war was coming because Hitler was a madman and he wanted to get out of town, and he did. He had friends in New York saying, Bonhoeffer, come over here. Things are not good in Germany. Why don't you go somewhere where you can be safe? And Bonhoeffer did. He made that decision and he left Germany. He got on a ship and he went to New York City, and he stayed there for a couple of weeks. And as he was in New York, and we have he's got a diary, he's got letters that he wrote from New York, and he said, I can't stand being here. The triviality of life in New York, the prosperity, the safety, the security, I hate it, while my people are back in Germany and they are suffering, and I have come and abandoned them. I've got loved ones over there, and not just loved ones, but just the country. And I can't stand to be in security when they are over there suffering, and I have rescued myself and abandoned them. And he got back on a ship in June. He didn't stay a month. June of 1939, and he went back to Germany. And in April of 1943, he was arrested, and he spent the last 2 years of his life in a prison. And he was executed in April of 1945. I look at these stories and I think, did they do the right thing? Did Bonhoeffer do the best thing to go back to Germany? I mean, I don't know how to parse that out. Did Navalny do the best thing? Was there some bit of folly? Was there some bit of hubris? Or was it just wisdom and courage? I don't know how to parse that out, but I admire it. I admire it. that they were willing to lay their life on the line, knowingly lay their life on the line and go do something that they thought was important, and that I would say they were right about that. It was important. And it makes me reflect on my own life. First of all, what am I doing? Secondly, would I be willing to do that kind of thing? Now, in that last Instagram post, Navalny published this Instagram post. This was January 7th, 2024. He says, I came back to Russia because I've got convictions. And if you're not willing to lose something because of your convictions, you don't have any convictions at all. The very next sentence. Of course, this doesn't mean that everyone who's not currently in prison lacks convictions. Everyone pays their price. For many people, the price is high, even without being imprisoned. So says Navalny. Says, I'm not judging anyone. If you don't happen to be in a Russian prison, that doesn't mean necessarily that you lack convictions. You might be paying a price, and that price might be high, even if it's not imprisonment. I think the implication there is if you're not paying a price, I don't know that you really have convictions. But you might have convictions even if you're not in prison. The point, I think, is that we all face our challenges. And different challenges are presented to different people at different times. And the question is not, have we faced the same challenges as Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Or have we faced the same challenges as Alexei Navalny? The point is, the challenges that God has presented to us, have we dealt faithfully with those challenges? It reminds me, I want to change gears somewhat drastically, I guess, but it reminds me of what Gandalf said to Frodo. All right? I'm talking about Middle Earth here. Yes, I'm talking about hobbits now, okay? And Frodo's a hobbit. Gandalf is, of course, not a hobbit. He's a wizard. But this is in The Lord of the Rings. This is the second chapter of the very first book. So the chapter is called, let me think, I've got it written down, The Shadow of the Past. But if you're reading The Lord of the Rings, it's six, whether you count it as 3 books or 6 books or 1 book, I don't know. But if you count it as 6 books, it's the first book. It's at the very beginning of the whole story, but it's chapter 2. And Gandalf is talking to Frodo about this ring that Frodo has in his possession. And Gandalf has said to Frodo, that ring is actually much more important than you have previously realized. And Gandalf has told Frodo about a dark lord named Sauron who wants to get a hold of that ring. And here's what Frodo says. Frodo says, I've got it written down here. Frodo says, I wish it need not have happened in my time. Why am I the one that has to deal with this? Why couldn't Bilbo have dealt with it? Why couldn't it have come after I died? Why do I have to be I didn't want the ring. I inherited the ring from Bilbo. Why do I have to be the one that deals with this? I wish it need not have happened in my time. And here's what Gandalf says. So do I. And so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. You don't get to pick the challenges that God places before you. There have been people, and maybe there are people in this room who look back and think, man, I wish I could have lived back in the day when they were doing this, and I wish I could have faced those circumstances that my grandfather or the great-grand or sometime in the past. It's not for us to choose. It's for us to face faithfully the challenges that God places before us. Sometimes we'll think back and think, I wish I could have lived in the first century in Judah. I wish I could have seen Jesus in the flesh. I wish I could have heard his words. I wish I could have seen his deeds. I wish I could have seen him walking on that water. I wish I could have been among that crowd who ate at his hand. The feeding of the 5,000. I wish I could have been on that mountain when Jesus sat down and started saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Oh, if I could have seen those things, faith would be so easy. Well, let me point out to you a couple of things about that. First of all, the people that actually did see Jesus, they are not the ones that we would say, well, faith was so easy for them. They did not find faith in Jesus so easy. In fact, it was those crowds who later in the story shouted out, "Crucify him, crucify him." Be careful what you wish for. The other thing I'll mention is that the people that saw Jesus, the people that were there, they had an opportunity we don't have. They had an opportunity we don't have. We don't get to choose that, and they didn't get to choose it. They will be held to stricter account. That's what Jesus says. Jesus says the generation in his day will be held to stricter account, specifically because they are the ones who were blessed to see him in the flesh. This is Matthew chapter 12, verses 38 to 42. He says, "The Queen of Sheba will rise up in judgment and condemn this generation because she came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and there is one greater than Solomon in your midst. The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment and condemn this generation because they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and there is one greater than Jonah in your midst." They didn't choose to be the generation that was there when Jesus came in the flesh, but they will be judged according to the opportunities they had. And we will be judged according to the opportunities we have. And so, this is Christmas. And what have you done? Another year older and a new year almost begun. One question that comes up a lot in terms of the celebration of Christmas is how December 25th got picked for that time. Why do we celebrate Christmas on the date of December 25th? It seems like an odd date to pick for the birth of Jesus. Do we think that Jesus was actually born on December 25th? And the answer to that is no. I don't know anybody who studies the issue who actually thinks December 25th is I don't think they would use the word probably, the birthday of Jesus. I'm going to say I have no idea what time of year or anything. I know about the sheep being out in the fields in Luke chapter 2. I don't know exactly what the significance of that is. I've heard said that it couldn't be in the winter because of that. I don't know if that's right or not. Charlie might be able to tell me on that. I don't know, especially 2,000 years ago in Palestine, whether that would, I don't know. I don't know when Jesus was born. I do know that December 25th was not picked as the birthday of Jesus because people had any sort of historical information. It wasn't that. It wasn't that there was some tradition that was passed down for ages and ages of December 25th being the actual day. That's not it. In fact, we don't have any information from at least the first 2 centuries, really even more than that anybody was interested in the day when Jesus was born. Of course, there's nothing in the New Testament about people being interested in the actual day. Look, listen, people didn't even celebrate birthdays at all at that time. That was not a thing that people did, was celebrate birthdays. Certainly not Jews. And so we don't have any historical reasons to think that was the particular day. So how did it get chosen as the particular day? Listen, there are 2 theories. I bet you've heard of one of them, and I bet you haven't heard of the other one. I'm going to tell you both theories. One of the one you have heard of, I think, is the one where the Christians co-opted a pagan festival that was already taking place on December 25th. And there was this festival to Saturnalia that was happening. I think it was proclaimed, it doesn't go back real far, but I think it was in the 3rd century, pagan emperors proclaimed December 25th is the day when they would celebrate this feast of the sun. The S-U-N, the ball of fire in the sky. They're going to celebrate that on December 25th. That was in the 3rd century, and so the idea is maybe Christians just took that and sort of Christianized it and said, we're going to celebrate the birth of the Son of God. That's one theory. We don't know if that's right. Let me tell you, we don't know if that's right. That is a theory that some people have, that maybe that's how December 25th got picked as the day, because there was already this festival that was happening that day. All right, let me tell you the second theory, and this one it gets a little convoluted maybe. We know from about the year 200 that Christians had picked out the day that Jesus died as March 25th. Tertullian is an author who says this about the year 200. Jesus died on March 25th. It's plausible. I don't know if he died on March 25th, but, we celebrate Easter around the time of the death of Jesus. Yeah, it's plausible. He may have died on March 25th. He died sometime around there, I have no doubt. Within a couple of weeks of that, I have no doubt. Maybe it was the day March 25th. People had picked out March 25th as the day he died. And they also said, I don't know why they wanted to say this, but this is what they said. These early Christians said, the Annunciation happened on the exact same day, March 25th. The day he died was the day of the Annunciation as well. You know what I'm talking about, the Annunciation? I'm thinking Luke chapter 1, Gabriel comes to Mary and says, what does he say? Blessed are you of women. And you're going to bear the Son of God in your womb. This is the Annunciation, when Gabriel the angel announces to Mary, this virgin, that she will bear the Son of God, the Annunciation. And these early Christians said that happened on the exact same day that he died, March 25th. Why did they say that? I'm not really sure, but that's what they said. That's what they said. The Annunciation happened on March 25th. Now, how long does a baby take to bake in the womb? What is it, it's about 9 months, isn't it? So March 25th, let's see, what's 9 months after that? That'd be the December 25th. That's what that is, December 25th. And so here's the other theory. The other theory, how did December 25th get picked as the day when he was born? Well, it's because they said March 25th was the day on which the Annunciation took place. And all you have to do is calculate 9 months after that, and you get December 25th, and there you go. Now, those are competing theories. Was it because there was a pagan festival? Was it because of this calculation? I don't know. I don't know how December 25th got picked as the day. Maybe it was both of those put together. Maybe they did that calculation, they landed on December 25th, and they said, hey, there's this other festival, we'll just Christianize that and we'll turn it into Christmas. Maybe I don't know. I don't know how it worked. The important thing, of course, for us is not the date of the birth of Jesus. I've already said, Christians in the first 2 centuries don't seem to have had any interest in when Jesus was born, the date on which Jesus was born. They don't talk about that. They tell all kinds of stories about Jesus. They make up. I'm talking about, there's early Christian apocrypha. There are these other gospels. You've probably heard of some of these other early gospels. They make up stories about Jesus, but they don't make up stories in the first 2 centuries about the birth of the day on which he was born. They're just not interested in that. The important thing for us is not the day on which Jesus was born. The important thing for us is, of course, not whether or not we celebrate Christmas as the birthday of Jesus, or we celebrate Christmas rather as just a time for family and friends to get together and give gifts to each other. The important, it's not even whether we celebrate Christmas at all as a holiday. The important thing for us is that Jesus was born. And that is what Paul is talking about in Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 through 11. Of course, that was the passage Josiah read for us. The end of that passage, verses 9 through 11, is the part of the story that is happening now. We live in that time. The whole thing, verses 6 through 11, is the story of Jesus. Paul summarizes the story of Jesus in verses 6 through 11 of Philippians chapter 2. We live in the time of the end of that, verses 9 through 11, when God highly exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. That's the time we live now. Of course, it's not the case that every knee now bows to the name of Jesus or every tongue has confessed, but we do look forward to that. What is already the case is that God has highly exalted him and given him the name that is above every name. That's the time that we live in. He is at the right hand of God. He does rule over his kingdom, and we are a part of that kingdom. What happened before that? This is verse 7. Christ emptied himself. Let me teach you a Greek word. The Greek word is kenosis. Kenosis. Some of you have maybe heard of this Greek word before. It is a word that means emptying. Emptying. Let me spell it for you. Kenosis. And if you Google kenosis, you will find all kinds of information. You will find a Wikipedia article, of course, about kenosis, and you will find all kinds of other information about this particular Greek word. This is a word theologians talk about quite a bit. A related word, is the word that Paul uses in Philippians 2, verse 7, to talk about what Jesus did. He emptied himself. He took on the form of a human being. He emptied himself to the point of death, even death of a cross. The emptying that Jesus, experienced, that Jesus embraced, that Jesus ran toward, that emptying did not begin at the crucifixion. I would say the emptying, the first major moment of the emptying, is the incarnation itself. That's what Paul means, I think, in Philippians 2:7. He emptied himself in becoming a human being. And listen, we have all kinds of stories about gods taking on flesh in some way, about gods. We have stories about Zeus becoming a human being for a limited period of time, and usually involving himself in some sort of sin while he does that. But we do have these stories about Zeus or other gods becoming a human being. But we don't have any stories other than one. We have one story about this that Paul is telling us in Philippians 2. We don't have any other stories about a God becoming a human being in this way. First, being conceived in a woman's womb, and then experiencing birth, and then becoming an infant, and then a toddler, and then what comes after toddler? Whatever the next stage is, and then the next stage, an adolescent and teenager and adult. We have a God who the Word became flesh. That doesn't mean that he became a 30-year-old man. He didn't skip adolescence. He didn't skip the toddler years. He didn't skip those poopy diapers as an infant, or screaming and keeping his parents up all night. He didn't skip that. That was part of the emptying. Verse 6 says, well, I read the New Revised Standard Version usually. It says, though being in the form of God. Maybe you have the word although. Although he was in the form of God. The word although is not actually there in the Greek text. That's added in. That's an interpretation. And it might not be the right way to understand it, as if the word though, sort of suggests to us that the emptying that Christ endured, that he experienced, that he embraced, the emptying that Christ embraced is despite the fact that he is God. It may rather be a different way of understanding it is best. A lot of scholars think that we should rather than although, we should say because. Because he was in the form of God, he emptied himself. Jesus Christ is the full and complete revelation to us of who our God is, and our God is one who embraces self-emptying. He empties himself. That's who God is. He doesn't insist on his rights. He doesn't insist on his prerogatives. He doesn't insist on getting everything his way. What he insists on is emptying himself on behalf of others. And Jesus is the perfect revelation of that. And when we go around town over the next few weeks and we see these manger scenes and we see that little baby in the manger, what we remember to ourselves is kenosis, emptying. This little baby represents God emptying himself on my behalf. Now, Paul starts the passage. This story of Jesus, Paul starts the passage in verse 5. And he does not say, because Jesus emptied himself for us, let us all worship Jesus. Or he doesn't say, the reason I'm telling you this story is so that we will sing the song of praise to Jesus. The reason I'm telling you this story is so that we will just thank Jesus for his great sacrifice on our behalf. Of course, we should do all those things, but that's not the reason Paul tells the story. Verse 5, have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Christ is one who emptied himself. And the reason Paul tells us that is so that we will imitate him, so that we will also be a people who embrace emptying, so that we will be a people who experience kenosis, self-emptying. Paul himself says in other places that he is doing that. I think about 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. I as an apostle, he says in 1 Thessalonians 2, I as an apostle could make certain demands, but I'm not going to do that. Rather, what I did is I acted as a nurse to you, and I loved you, and I gave myself for you. Or he says in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 19, even though I'm an apostle and I could insist on my rights, I became a slave, Paul says. The gospel demands emptying. It is probably not the case. I don't know that I want to say that. I'm going to say it, but I'm not sure that it's right. I mean, maybe we will have these opportunities, but I'll just say it. It is probably not the case that we will have the opportunity to so empty ourselves in the same way that Alexei Navalny emptied himself. I am thankful for his example of self-emptying. I am thankful for the example of Dietrich Bonhoeffer of self-emptying, as these people, I think, show us what Christ did for us, and they show us an imitation of that as well. I'm thankful for the example of Paul. We might not be faced with those same challenges that these others have been faced with. The question for us is, what are we doing with the challenges in front of us? And how are we emptying ourselves on behalf of Christ and on behalf of others? The last words that Navalny wrote in his memoir, these are not the last words that he wrote, but these are the very last words that appear in his memoir. This is an epilogue. He actually wrote it in March of 2022 after he had received another 9-year prison sentence. He had already been in prison for a year by that point, but he had received another. He knew by that point, I'm not ever getting out of prison. I will die in a Russian prison. He knew by that point that's what's going to happen. And he wrote this epilogue to his memoir. These are the very last words that appear in the memoir. My job, Navalny said, is to seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and leave it to good old Jesus and the rest of his family to deal with everything else. They won't let me down, and will sort out all my headaches. As they say in prison here, they will take my punches for me. Navalny was perfectly confident in what he did. He thought he did the right thing in going back to Russia. He was confident in that. As I look, I don't know what to say about that, but I can admire the bravery and courage, and I am thankful that he did it, because he provides an example to me of somebody that emptied himself in imitation of Jesus. And that's what Christmas represents. The incarnation of God, the emptying that Jesus experienced and that we should all run toward in imitation of him. If you have a need this morning and you want to help empty yourself, and you need the prayers of this body of believers or some other need that you want to express, we would love to help you with that in any way we can. Why don't you come forward now while we stand and sing?